to the Lunch Talk hashtag 41. Lunch Talk is a monthly event in this university that is hosted by triple IU students and fans to gain knowledge directly from the experts. My Honorable, the Dean of the Faculty of Education, Prof. Nina Nurmila, PhD, Head of PhD Study Program, Bapak Bambang Sumintono, PhD, and all my dear lecturers here, there's Bu Destina and Pak Lukman, and Excellencies, Honorable Speakers, Prof. Anna Engin, PhD, and all the participants are I'm proud of. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Let me introduce myself. My name is Dwi Oktariani. I'm from PhD Batch 3 and I will be your moderator for the day. It's such a great pleasure meeting to meet you all. And first and foremost, I would like to express my gratitude to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. And before we start this event, let me start with Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. And this event is connected to a hybrid setting. So I would like to welcome the participants in the who join us virtually. We hope you can be here in person in our lovely campus, Triple IU Theater. And then let's give applause for all of us. Okay, before we proceed to the main event, allow me to present agenda for today. First, welcome remarks by the Dean of the Faculty of Education, and then the second, first about presentation of the material with our honorable speakers, and the third question and answer session. To begin today's event, I would like to invite our Dean of Faculty of Education to deliver the opening remarks. Please give a warm welcome to Prof. Nina Nurmila.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahirrahmanirrahim. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Muhammad sayyidina wa ala alihi wa sahbihi. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. I'm also grateful to Professor Nagel who is willing to share her expertise on environment and sustainability in higher education, theory and practice. The moderator I think will introduce you on introduce himself in your talk. But I know that you are writing a book on Islam and environment, and as a Muslim myself, of course, I know that there are so many verses in the Quran, or centered the environment because, and also the Quran has highlighted, for example, Dhahrul Musadul fil Bari wal Bahri bima kasabat aydina. So there is something that human being do that jeopardize our earth. Yeah, like for example, in Indonesia we have our big forest in Kalimantan, but no Kalimantan is like on that island we build the new the new capital that must be like deforestation and also the mining. Yeah, the mining mostly took place there, and mining of course involve deforestation, and that affect actually not only for Indonesian environment but also the world. Yeah, because it is like the lung. We are like sailing in the same boat. If someone do something with the boat, then something will happen to all of us. Yeah? And as you know that there is been like a climate change. For example, in Indonesia, well, we have only two seasons, yeah, rainy season and dry season. But actually, rainy season usually begins beginning September. So that's why, okay, if you have the month end with ber means that you need to get ready to prepare for the event. Yeah? So that's why I remember the rainy season is beginning from September, October, November, December, and usually end in February. But now we are in May already, and we still have rain every day. That means there is something wrong in our climate that's destroy the regularity. Yeah. So, and okay, so that is important for us to how to sustain our earth, meaning that we can consume, take advantage of what is available in this earth without neglecting or forgetting that our future generation also need our earth the way it is today. Yeah? And in terms of conserving the environment, we need to start from ourselves. Yeah, okay, we need to think big, start small, and act now. Thinking big that we are one or part of the world community that we need to protect our earth, our environment, yeah, and think we start small. We can start from well, it's not small thing, but even though you have already paid for the rent in the dormitory, for example, it is urgently needed that you conserve, for example, the electricity or the water by turning off the aircon. Yeah, before you are leaving your room. Also, when you are having a class and you finish your class, please turn off the light and the aircon. Yeah, because you will never know that maybe nobody else will use that room. Yeah? If you are the last person to enter the room, please turn off the aircon and electricity and start now. Start from today. No, no more postponement for the conserving the environment. Also, I suggest you to, for example, to grouping or classifying your garbage in order we can reduce, reuse, and recycle. Yeah, I learned a lot of this during my English course. I think back in early 1990s. So this shows that you as educator, as a teacher, you can improve your knowledge, including today from Professor Anage, about how to protect our environment in order to support sustainability. Yeah? And by knowing the alignment, the knowledge from the experts, I hope you can teach it in your classroom as an educator. Okay, let's hear from Anna today. Thank you very much for your willingness to share. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Our thanks go to dear Professor Nuna Nurba, PhD, Dean of the Faculty of Education, for the warm welcome and inspiring guidance. Hopefully, what is conveyed can be our engagement and guidance in carrying out today's activity. Okay, dear participants, in signing the highly anticipated lunch talk session, let me open the discussion with a simple thought that the future of the Earth is being shaped in today's learning spaces. Our talk this time will raise a very relevant and important topic. That's namely environment and sustainability in higher education, theory and practice. Amidst the challenges of climate crisis, environmental degradation, and massive social transformation, higher education no longer function only as a center of knowledge, but also as an ecologically and social responsible agent of change. How are sustainability theories integrated into the curriculum? To what extent are environmentally friendly practices implemented on our campus? So, today we can know about how environmental education and outreach in Muslim majority settings such as Islamic oriented university present unique leadership opportunities for further theory and practice, including programs and pedagogy. Let's explore together in this inspiring lunch talk session with a great resource person who has been present in our midst, Professor Anna and Kate. Okay, Prof, before we present, I will read your profile first. Okay. Okay, here with us, Prof. Anna is Phyllis Distinguished Achievement Professor in the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, where she teaches environmental humanities and has served as Associate Dean and Chair of the Undergraduate Program in Environmental Study, a program that serves almost 1,000 students each year. She has been a visiting professor in the MPP program in climate change, teaching climate change ethics in the Indonesian International Islamic University for the past year, academic year, and her most recent book is Muslim Environments, Religious and Social Foundation, was published by Columbia University Press in 2019, has shaped a new field of religion of environment, and it draws on examples from Indonesia and perfectionism practice, learning emotion, and the recited Quran in Indonesian books too, and holding a PhD in the history of religions from the University of Chicago. Her many widely acclaimed books and articles have treated religion and culture in Southeast Asia, the Quran, theory and method in religious studies, and Islamic education for over 3 decades. Wow. And she is former fellow at the Center for the Study of Higher Education at University of California, Berkeley. So, this afternoon for our lunch talk, Professor Anaget will be presenting perspective on academic programs in environment and sustainability in higher education in North America and Indonesia and the global south. We look forward to hearing your thoughts on how Islamic universities such as our might contribute to the leadership in this area. Okay, I welcome our incredible speaker, Prof. Anna, to present your material and also allocate time for question and answers after this session.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Can y'all hear me in the back okay? Yeah. The ambassador was here the ambassador was here this morning and I was training to ambassador this time. So hopefully I'll be nice and loud for you and keep you all awake. So Ms. Reed, thank you for that lovely introduction. Well, esteemed colleagues, students, guests, others, and especially those of you watching on the live stream today. It's an honor and a privilege to be here talking about education and environment. You know, sometimes in Indonesia I speak on Islam, so my PhD is in. Would you prefer I use this? Okay, all right. Sometimes I speak on Islam, sometimes I speak about Southeast Asia, like about what Muslims in Southeast Asia are doing in areas of sustainability, climate, and environment. Sometimes I speak in religious studies. I was just doing that at UGM in Jogja. But I'm really happy to be here to speak about education because that's what I spend a lot of my time working on. Not just here, but in the United States. So as was mentioned in the introduction, I run an undergraduate, a chair of an undergraduate program in environment now, it's an old program, but we're responding to new challenges, always seeking to be leaders in the field. And one of the messages that I want to bring to you today is that the environment is a rapidly changing field. And that's not just because the environment is changing rapidly, as Budekan mentioned, right? With climate change and even our own weather patterns today, you know, crazy it's raining, right? But also the field itself is changing. So let me start with just an example from my own life. Yeah. So the undergraduate program at University of Wisconsin at Madison is an old program, it's a big program, it's a leader in the field, and because it's so old, 50 years old, it didn't have sustainability in the curriculum, right? Because sustainability in English, and also I think in Indonesian and other Asian systems, is relatively new. However, when our chancellor and others recommend that we start a program in sustainability, right? Because people want it for assessment, for all kinds of good reasons, we say, but we already have that. We already have the class in life cycle analysis. We already have the class in business and engineering and law, so on and so forth. So it's a question of how to draw forward this new emergent curriculum in the midst of what's already there. Now, it's not the first time this happened. Before I showed up in environmental studies, there had already been a transition from something called natural resources into environment. So in a sense, the field is leading and also keeping up with other kinds of changes. And that's what I want to talk about today. So you all are educators just as I am. We know that we teach our students, you know, as Declan mentioned, we try to teach them in the best way. But I want to take a step back today from that practice and also think a little bit, I guess, about the theory of education. How are we going to configure programs in higher education in the best way to deliver the best outcomes for our students and also for those who teach them? So that's what I'm talking about. To do that, I'm going to talk about three things in my limited time here. First, I want to give you a little bit of information about the history of environmental studies. I didn't know this. When I was getting a PhD in Islamic studies or religious studies, I had to learn it. And I think it's helpful as background. Now, because I come from the United States, you can hear the accent, right? Because I come from the, try to slow down. Because I come from the United States, it's going to be US centric, but also that's not entirely wrong either. I think that the United States has a history in the development of the field that's worth knowing about, even in the global south. Second, I want to focus, as I said, on higher education, program building, curriculum, which would be relevant if you're an educator, even a secondary or or elementary educator in your own classroom. But thinking also about what we do in the university. That's also practice-based. I suppose it's theory, but it's also about what we do and what I do on the job every day. I want to emphasize, though, that I'll be talking about higher education, not really like vocational curriculum so much. I work a lot with folks in the Muslim environmentalism sort of world who are in Islamic schooling, like santren, madrasas, that kind of thing. That's a big focus of programming, especially with the support now of the Ministry of Religious Affairs. It's not so much what I'm talking about either right now, but it's relevant. Finally, I hope what's the most relevant to you, I want to talk about possibilities and opportunities, the future of Islamic studies, and institutions like IIIU in Indonesia, drawing you back into the conversation and also thinking about what are the distinctive characteristics of a university with a mission and a profile like this one, not just in the Global South, but as one with an Islamic identity. Usually questions are at the very end, but I'm going to do something a little unorthodox right now. Active learning. Yeah, I'm going to flip the script. And I want to know what kind of questions you have before I start the talk. Given that, what do you hope I will tell you about? Just anything. We can pass the microphone up. What questions do you have in this area about higher education, environment, sustainability, and climate? Because I'm a teacher, I'm very patient for a silent room. I'll give you a couple minutes. I can handle it. Live with the pressure of the silence. If there's no question, that's all right. Yeah, who else? What do you want to know? Be like Oprah Winfrey here.
Thank you. I was hoping to get the answer on what kind of curricula and content that is suitable to face the most pressing issue of our time, which is climate change. In the higher education, you mentioned earlier it's not supposed to be vocational focus, but a little practice-based. But how to reconcile that? Thank you.
How to teach climate in the classroom. I hear you. Yeah, it's a student actually from our MVP program on climate change. Other questions? That you'll be sad if I don't answer. Yeah, right there behind the camera. Yeah, see that? No. Yes, you want to know. Is there any questions? Yeah.
I want to ask how to make naturally, like in a daily basis, in a university environment, all the how to say the community inside the campus realize the important and the significance of the environment.
Thank you for that question. So engaging campus and using campus communities is a resource for education that's really important. I'll talk about that as well as mine. A third one? Yeah.
I want to ask whether, as the university, how can we be impactful for our environment or social, maybe in the community? Because usually we do research about environment, but how can those research be impactful?
Thank you. I love that question. I love that. Oh my gosh, see? Question and answer is how it rolls. Let's do, I see 3 more hands. We have time for it. Yeah. Yes, you were next. Yeah, go. And there's 2 behind you.
Good afternoon, Ramana. Actually, I already asked about this during your session with Prof. Nasrul Umar. I was talking about something like the waste. So, because last semester I did the research on the practice of IT and sustainable participation, and so I just want to know about um, how we can bring the consciousness of the people. Actually, as a Muslim, there is a hablum minallah, hablum minanas, hablum minal a'lam that I just know from the Islamic education and hablum minanas. But now maybe how to without give the fear, like maybe someone only want to take care of the environment because the hisab or something like that, but how to bring the consciousness about that. And after that, maybe this question is for the dean of our Prof. Nina. Maybe like because from Estudia, I think Bu Desti at that at that room during my presentations. So I'm how can I say, I'm feeling concerned about the waste. And of course, I think Eka also behind there, one of the person also taking care of the environment in the dorm. We are thinking about how about the waste in here, how we can integrate the waste is a lot in this university as a green environment, a green campus. But how we really not in theoretical, but how to practice? Can we also support it by the faculty if the student now? I remember you mentioned like, okay, go ahead if you want to build the waste bin or something like that. But
I was like, go for it.
but can we get the support from the faculty, or we can hand in hand with the social science because we want to make a program in Studia? So can we just getting supported from the campus, especially because very far away. Okay, we're talking about the climate change, but yes, we can do it now. Yes, we can do it now, as Nina also mentioned about the electricity, water, something else. But how we consume that we affect to the earth. I think that's all.
Got it. This is why you talk before me, right? Because you have messages for sure. All right, there were 2 more things that I need to put, 3 more things I need to put in my talk. I have time. It's all right. It's okay. I'm gonna wait for.
Okay.
You're gonna get the last word. You're gonna close this whole thing. Yeah.
Okay, Prof. Aiman, nice to meet you
Nice to
today.
meet you too.
Actually, my background is Islamic education.
Cool.
In my bachelor degree, I'm a student at Islamic education, and also at my master degree, also Islamic education. And currently, I also want to focus on Islamic education also.
Yeah.
But my question is how to integrate the awareness of environment or environment awareness in Islamic education, because sometimes we tend to focus on the how we do the practice in terms of Islamic education.
Yep.
Thanks.
I gotcha. Yeah, especially in higher education, right? People are talking about this in like the secondary level. Yeah, I hear you. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Prof. Atta.
Thank you.
This is because I don't really have a question because I'm from chemistry and my concern is about the sustainability, but
Yeah.
my practice is
we try to develop like the context like ocean acidification for the students. Sometimes we also develop like how to use the environmental tropical material. Yeah, this is our research about the sustainability from the chemistry view.
Teaching.
I'm teaching in general chemistry, but not in here. I'm just a scholar in resident in here. Yeah, nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
You need to say something, Isma. Yeah. No. Okay.
Hello, Professor. Actually, I want to ask that in what extent that Islamic rituals like fasting wudu is consciously related to the environment and sustainability.
Great question. Yeah. I'll work it in for sure. And then last one. Okay.
Hello, Prof. Anna. I don't know if it's relevant or not, but my question would be in the we are surrounded by this trend like Kabur Raja dulu escape for a while because when talking about money, educators want bigger money than small amount of money, and the thing is when we want to build ethics in environmental, we need to build from like the bottom, from remote area, for example. And for educators, and I've talked to many some of my friends, and they think that I don't think I will work in Indonesia because the payment is low compared to abroad like that. So my question would be how we increase this willingness to educate educate students in remote area, because I think it's if we want to talk about environment and sustainability, we we should start from the bottom, right? Not the top down, but bottom up. I think that's my question. Do you get the idea?
Like how to place value on education. Is that what you mean in terms of compensation for the people doing it?
I mean, like for the educators,
Yeah.
how to increase
They are
their
teachers.
willingness.
Yeah.
It's not about money as well, but like having responsibility as educators that I need to share my knowledge despite having a low amount of money. How to increase that? How we increase the moral or responsibility to educate children in remote area?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for this question. So one of the things that does is that recenters you as the experts, which is another takeaway I want you to have today. The history of this field is a history of expertise, of people who know the science, right, who do the policy, and yet, as in the question we just heard, and in others, about how can we have, as a campus community, enact sustainability measures, right, have political buy-in for that. There's a lot of you who are talking about how to engage communities and how to actually have a kind of an agency or a power in this area. So I'm glad that you spoke first. The other thing that I just want to point out, I'll work in all your stuff if I can, Philip, but I also want to point out that these questions really covered a big spectrum, didn't they? Right? Like there was sustainability, there was environmental science, there was climate, there was education, there was sort of questions about Islam, right? And all of that is connected. And one of the things that I see is my task as an administrator and an educator in the field of environmental studies, sustainability, and climate is honestly just to sort that out for people so that we can have productive conversations and say, this conversation is about sustainability that has these parameters and goals. Climate tends to be directed in this area. This is how sustainability and climate can interact, right? And I think that part of what can bring that about is actually having curricula that are really, in the present and forward-looking as well. And I think that Islamic and religious and ethical perspectives have a lot to offer. Okay, so now I have half an hour left. Let me start on my stuff. And I want to start, remember I said I was going to start with this sort of story about environmental studies. And if this isn't your story for environmental studies, then, yeah. But this is a story that we tell ourselves in North America. So, it's worth knowing at least what people are saying in North America, I suppose. So, the story of environmental studies in many ways begins in the academic world with environmental science. Here's a picture, of course, of mangroves. We have at least one expert in the room about mangrove conservation and blue carbon. And this reflects natural resources as an academic approach that dates back maybe 50 years in the United States. There's also another field around risk management, and in Indonesia disaster management that's also very great. But even still today, this is a Google search will show you this. Many programs in environmental studies, in fact, our scientists and chemists like, yep, are programs in environmental science, right? Yeah. In fact, where I teach, we have both. We have a parallel programs, environmental studies and environmental science. Scientists didn't want to let go of it, folks. And a lot of times then, these are identified, right? I'll talk more about that a little bit later on, but for now, I want to take a look a little bit more at environmental science and think about where this idea of environment comes from. Because a lot of times, like in a practical way, when I try to decide like what course should go where, like should you get credit for that chemistry class or that soil science class as being environmental studies or not, right? What criteria do I use for that? There's questions about how to, identify the environmentalness of even areas of study. So sometimes it's just in terms of themes or subfields. Like energy, that's going to be environment, that branch of engineering, or just environmental engineering. Climate, atmospheric oceanic science, freshwater systems, soils and earth sciences, biomedicine, biology and conservation, like biodiversity. Like we know that those are environment. How do we know? We just know that, right? There's a formal definition that probably our colleague in chemistry and others teach themselves. My students have it memorized, which is that the environment is, you can rehearse it with me if you want, the interaction of biotic and abiotic factors. So like things that are living and things that aren't living, when they come together, right, that somehow magically produces the environment. What's missing from that picture? People, right? The thing that sustainability is concerned about. So already, what I was saying about having these different conversations and trying to sort them out, already that's a difficult conversation. If I'm teaching in my class, right? Suppose you were my students in America right now, right? You're my colleagues, but suppose you were my students. We would have students in here from environmental sciences and environmental studies, right? We would have chemists and others. And it would be a question like, how much are we going to talk about people? How much are we going to talk about Islamic meaning? Or how much calculus do you need to know? These are real questions for how are we going to have a shared conversation. My question is, when I look at the history of this field, I'm not really an historian, but I write books, about the field. I wonder, why not just call it science? Like environmental science, when does it become, what is this label, what is this word in English or any other language, that semantically references it? What is the environment saying? And I have a couple of answers to this question. One is historical, and the other is more humanistic. Let's start with history. So this is, this is our hometown. Here's Jakarta. All of these images are from Indonesia. You will recognize some of them. The idea of the environment or the room was invented not that long ago, which is difficult but not that hard to sort out if you're like me and you write books about that idea throughout time, right? If I'm going to write a book about Islam and the environment, my book is not going to start in 1972. Right? I want my book to start in the 7th century. Maybe at the beginning of the creation of time. You know, I don't know. That's up to theologians. So I need to think then about what ideas and concepts from Islamic history I'm going to map onto the environment. Which I said is actually not that hard, right? Because in a way you know it when you see it. And also, as you, I'm sure, know in this room, it was Muslim majority systems that invented a lot of the environmental science as we practice it even in the United States right now. Chemistry, biology, earth sciences, and so on and so forth. So the idea of the environment in terms of our academic programs is something that's new. There was a time in I'll just stick to my country in the United States. We didn't have programs in environmental studies. In fact, you can date them to my lifetime. Even the word ecology is fairly new in the English language. And there's a good book by Andrea Wolf about Alexander von Humboldt, a German guy. Essentially is an inventor of the idea of ecology. The idea of nature has been around for a long time with its own history, but the idea of nature isn't really what was the motivator for starting programs in environmental studies or environmental science. It was crisis. So in the United States, I say this not just because I'm from the state of California, there was a terrible oil spill. On the, see, you know this, right? You know this even in the global south. Yeah. So there was a terrible oil spill off the coast of California. And that was, among other things, a catalyst for people saying, we've got to do something about this. And it was at University of California, Santa Barbara, it's not far from LA, where some professors, some scientists said, okay, we're going to do this, literally this value added over the science that we do to come together to solve the problem, right, of ecology. And then meanwhile, there was this sort of public awareness that was growing. I remember as a child, and you must have seen it here too, the little birds that were washing up on shore covered in oil. The sense that there was a crisis, that somehow what was going on with the environment, like Declan was saying, wasn't just nature in a steady state, but were changes that were unprecedented, were changes that were no analog. They'd never been seen before. Problems for which there might not even be solutions, right? That's what a crisis is. Was the thing that in the United States, at least, is credited with being the beginning of the environmental movement and the beginning of programs like those at University of California at Santa Barbara. I want to say though, returning to Indonesia for a minute, when I was doing interviews for that book, that Muslim environmentalism's book that I did, and I asked people who were around, 50 years ago, like how, like at Uganda, for example, like how did you start your program in environmental studies or environmental science? They told a different kind of story. I found it really interesting. The story in general that I heard in Indonesia emphasized more community development, emphasized more ideas about community management. So it's not just like the Kalpataru Prize that people talk about as like a measure of recognition and environmental leadership and achievement in Indonesia, but it's the Adi Guru Prize, right? It's having a tidy, a good community, yeah. It's still about solving a problem though, and a problem-based concept. So in our own mission in environmental studies at University of Wisconsin at Madison, we have in our mission and vision solving problems. And also I've noticed that as well when I was just doing like a little web search like at UI and other programs here in Indonesia, which are basically like environmental science programs as far as I could tell. Oh, actually, I don't want to talk about the tiger yet. We're still on air quality in Jakarta. So let me just take a minute and tell you a little bit about a book that I like. You were asking, like, what can you teach? In the English language, there's a book that's pretty readable. Like, I think that students with English, you know, capacity, proficiency could handle it okay. It's, I don't have a slide for it, but you can Google it. It's a co-authored book, and one of the authors is Ward, W-A-R-D-E, Ward, and others, and it's called The Environment and History of an Idea. It's kind of a book about history, kind of not, but I really like this book for introducing students to these ideas about environmental studies. Where does it come from? What is it? What's your motivation in that whole scene? One reason why I like it is it's not written by Americans. It's a book about international cooperation, and it's international. Some of the authors are European and also Australian. I also like it because it tells kind of an origin story, like how things began for environmental studies. It's an interesting and helpful one. You know, in the United States, we like to tell our story of how people started to notice the environment. In terms of another book, a book by Rachel Carson called Silent Spring, which was about the use of pesticides in America. Maybe you've heard of it. Or Wisconsin's own Aldo Leopold. But this book, The Environment, the History of an Idea, by multiple authors, the first one of whom is Ward, starts out with a few ideas. Just go through them real quick. I don't have a slide here, you know, I'm sure like your generative AI can tell you this faster than I can. But to give you a guidepost to it, they have a few ideas as sort of being like how the environment was born. And it's not about anything real. It's not about like real mountains or streams or wildlife. It's conceptual. So first they say that the environment is a crisis concept. Crisis. I already introduced you to this idea a minute ago with like the birds covered in oil, right? And what Ward and the other authors of this book say is that in the 20th century, remember, in the middle of the 20th century, after the Second World War, as we call it, the idea that there was a continued crisis, for example, in terms of population, controversial idea, but people wrote about that as being like, you know, a problem that might not be able to be solved. Not to mention, in the Cold War, the threat of a nuclear war caused people to think in these expanded kind of, sometimes we call it the Anthropocene, but these expanded frameworks around the environment. People say, wow, we have to do things differently. You know, this is a new level. Second, this book talks about the role of experts and expertise. I love this because it's totally true. They say that the environment began as a problem-solving project through national and international efforts of people coming together from different fields, like the chemist, with the biologist, with the social scientist, with the expert in that local system, and so on and so forth, to look at the same problem from different angles. And that's the beginning of the idea that environmental studies is interdisciplinary. The third point that Ward and others make is that the environment is a future-oriented idea. In a sense, it's about trying to see what isn't seen, to know what isn't knowable. This is why I think religion is really helpful. If what you're trying to imagine is an unimaginable future, like, you know, climate disaster, right? It's future-oriented, and we see this in language like future generations and sustainability. And then finally, I like this too, they emphasize that the environment was built on the idea of, the word is the English word of numeracy. Numeracy. Numerous is like numbers, like STEM, having data, having hard data, that's what's authoritative. And I think all of these ideas are interesting, and like I said, I think they're true. And also, I think that they're an opportunity to think and reflect about how things may be different here, in the future, and in the global south. Because you started out the session today with your own expertise, and you knew a lot, and you had a lot to say. And you were concerned with the authority of communities, not so much with the authority of statistics, right? So already we're outside the box. All right, so I was talking about environmental science a little bit. Now let me talk about environmental studies. For some people, they're the same thing. For me, in the fields of humanities, they are not the same thing. Environmental science doesn't include me. Environmental studies does, right? It includes me in what I do, looking at Islam and questions of meaning and ethics like we were discussing at the beginning. Okay, so both environmental studies and environmental science are interdisciplinary. That's how we distinguish ourselves. I'm glad that my colleague the scientist is nodding. Like, if you are ever, like me, whether you expect it or not, in charge of a program of environmental studies, and people say, well, what do? You know, what's the criterion for your students passing and getting degrees? The answer up till now has been we are interdisciplinary. So like, I'll actually assess my own students in doctoral and master's and undergrad programs about how well they can put together different approaches. Yeah, how well can you take an idea from, I don't know, humanities and Islamic theology and put that together with chemistry and put that together with some kind of, you know, meaningful project for the community. Now, for environmental science, there's still a question of how to put social factors in. Sometimes that definition, the environment is the interaction of biotic and abiotic factors, kind of adds on, and then people too. And in environmental science programs or environmental studies programs that are based in environmental science, it's kind of a question, right? Are they just kind of adding on the people stuff, you know, to that real hard, you know, physical science or biological science? In the field of environmental studies, this is less of a question. Like, I'm sorry, I talk about my program, but, you know, go with what you know. In my program, physical science, biological science, social science, and humanities all are even. Like, they're all foundation courses. You need to show mastery, you know, hopefully in all of them in order to be, you know, considered someone who has mastered the field of knowledge. And I put the tiger here, not just because I was recently in West Sumatra and love it, but because the idea that the tiger is a good example of all of those things coming together, right, in an interdisciplinary kind of a way. So, you know, I know people right now working with educational institutions in Padang and elsewhere in West Sumatra, and also with NGOs who are bringing biological science to bear on studying, you know, the endangered charismatic, you know, species of the harimau, and also working with communities to realize that the protection of, you know, the tiger is related to community practices, adat, if you will, of people living in multi-species relationships with this wildlife for quite some time. And then as someone from the field of humanities, I can tell you that this is a really powerful symbol, right? Not just because, you know, everybody loves tigers, but the idea of extinction, you know, seeing the charismatic elephant or the tiger or that poor polar bear on the melting ice cap, right? Immediately indicates a message, and a message that we were talking about, like what ethically motivate people, that has an affective kind of an impression that it can make on people and get the message across, like the birds covered in oil, right? Symbols, we know when we study religion, including Islam, can say things that can't be said any other way. All right, I have a lot more to say on humanities to come, including Islam, but let me keep it going, because there's more I want to say about this field of environmental studies and environmental science, particularly for those of you who not just want to learn it, but want to teach it and want to see it taught in the university like this one. So I've got a little bit to say about sustainability, and then about climate, and then I'll wind up on time. So sustainability, like I mentioned in the beginning, is kind of a newcomer in this landscape. Also, sustainability, you talk about an unstable word, is not as true in all languages where I know it. It's coming from different streams. So sustainability has its history in international development. The text for what is sustainability is a bureaucratic report from 1987. It's called the Brundtland Report, Our Common Future, from the UN. So that's international development stuff. Also, the field of business and economy is really invested in sustainability in ways that are supported by environmentalists, and sometimes that get criticism too. Engineering is also concerned with sustainability. And what I find trying to come up now with a curriculum in this field is putting this together means that there needs to be some kind of a coherent center to it, because it's not just like, oh, you know it when you see it. And sustainability begins to sort of unravel the edges of environment in interesting ways. One thing I can say that's a common denominator among approaches for sustainability is people claiming that there is a systems-based approach. What does that mean? I don't know. I was a math major. I thought too hard about systems. I can't tell you. But people say that there's a systems-based approach, and this makes sense to people in an environmental context because ecology, that field that von Humboldt or whoever made up, is about a holistic model where there's a larger system of integrated parts, think about an ecosystem. That idea is translated into sustainability, looking at, systems of production, if you're looking at life cycle assessment, or other kinds of sustainable systems. In order to identify what is sustainability, there's kind of slogans. People, planet, profit, or from Brundtland, economy, society, environment, or simply the listing of SDGs. But I don't know, a listing doesn't give me sometimes the kind of depth that I feel like I need to make my own coherent ethical argument. And for that, in sustainability, we find this language about future generations. It's in the Brundtland Report too. So in a sense, when I dig down deeper and deeper and deeper into what does it all mean, not because I'm philosophizing all the time, but because I want my program to work, and I want to know, did my course count or not, I'll come down to ethical ideas like future generations. Now, this is what I'm writing up in my most recent book. It's a book on ethics, and I'm sitting in Humanities B, working on it all the time. Come on by my office and say honest. In sustainability and environmental studies education, this gets to many of your questions. It's not so much the theory or the ethics that people are talking about in the classroom, it's the practice. And the practice is the theory. That's one of the, you weren't saying it, but that's one of the things I heard when you were speaking at the beginning of our session today. Is the questions about how to teach, how to have an impact, how to convey meaningful messages are about how to engage communities and get things done. And I think it's actually a sophisticated kind of a theory to see practice as the theory. And those of you in the field of education should know exactly what I'm talking about, because a lot of really smart people have said that already in your field. So across the board in higher education, whether you call it environmental science, environmental studies, or sustainability, people are focusing on practice-based approaches. We'll take that interdisciplinary idea. Let's have the students come together like they're the experts, just like we did at the beginning. We were workshopping things this morning, this afternoon, and have them solve a problem together. Do a capstone project. Do like we do in the MPP program right here at IIIU. And that practice-based approach, like here, this is an Islamic example of the Sampad waste management coming out of Jogja. Muhammadiyah got the idea, although it wasn't originally a Muhammadiyah person who was doing it, and now it's nationally promoted for waste management within the mosque, both as like real practice that like moves waste where it needs to go, but also as a symbolic model. Because institutions like a mosque, like a university, our campuses themselves also have a larger function of showing, what can happen within wider communities and what is possible. So a lot of the education is about practice itself, and within those practices, the value added of ethics comes out, just like in knowledge is question. Like maybe you're there because your expertise is about how to do, some kind of a trash audit. Yet probably the reason why you took that major or you joined that group is because you have an ethical kind of a motivation. And I think that's what we can bring forward more. I think that looking at how community-based work can have an environmental impact is an opportunity for an institution such as this one, not just in areas like sociology, but education and Islamic studies as well. Climate, a couple of you had questions about how to talk about climate. Climate in a lot of ways breaks the system. So, breaks the system, like for example, of thinking about problems and solutions in these rational neoliberal ways, like we'll just, put a value on nature and, make things cost more, or private property or rights of nature, because climate, as we teach it and learn it right here at Triple IU, is a question of justice. The students right here are learning about policy and international relations in terms of, clear and binding negotiations for climate justice. And the conversation doesn't have to go on very long before it really gets kind of deep. Who pays more? Who owes more? Who's more responsible? Not just North and South, right? And then when the question is about the risk and the danger to future generations, how do you even understand that? There's no ethics, at least in the Western tradition that I know, it can even handle future generations. Like John Locke wasn't thinking about that. Yeah. That's also why I think that Islamic perspectives are so helpful. Even for secular perspectives. Like you don't have to be like a Muslim or even a person of faith to recognize that the Quranic framework is a robust and dynamic register for talking about future intergenerational justice. It's a way to start a conversation and to point to a way to have that conversation. The existential stakes of climate mean that environment becomes an ethical and humanistic question for us all. That's why people can't think about it. It's too much, right? So I think that climate points to not just the need for the best science and the best education, but also the best humanities and the best religious studies we can get, even for the folks who aren't religious or aren't in a religious kind of setting. Okay, so here's my picture of a waterfall with many streams. It's not exactly my idea. I had a great conversation with an administrator at a state Islamic university not long ago who was recognizing that a university with a mission around Islam has an opportunity to have a humanities-driven curriculum and to lead with these kinds of questions about justice, environmental justice, intergenerational justice, community-based approaches that complement, that are on balance with other kinds of approaches in, say, environmental science or what I do in the United States. It's a different articulation than just solving problems, right? It would ask, like, what even are the problems? What problems for whom? What's being sustained and how? My thesis in my book is that the environment is an ethical idea. It's interdisciplinary, right? So it is a scientific idea, it's also ethical, and I think that that's an opportunity to begin to think about how to use values to organize the approach. Like multiple, I don't mean like I'm right, you're wrong. But I mean looking at values in a pluralistic context, which is one of the great strengths of Indonesian education and theory, right? Not just you. I am out of time. So let me just end with this, and we will have time for a few more questions, because I was allotted 45 minutes to speak, and then there's more time for questions and answers, right? This week, okay. So here's a Balinese kingfisher flying into the future. The environment is a future-oriented concept, like I was saying. I think that having, especially an Islamic approach, can be a helpful model for how the field of environmental studies can move forward. So I'm talking about, how can Islamic studies look at environment, like your question, but I'm also moving beyond that too. I'm talking about how can environmental studies education learn from indigenous approaches, learn from religious approaches, and so on and so forth. Now, in Western Europe, the old religion-science distinction is one that has its own distinctive history, and sort of the romantic blame of science and scientism for like not respecting nature has its own history too. And I'm not really talking about any of that. I'm not talking about, religion coming in to correct science in some ways. I'm talking about how a humanities-based or, religious-based kind of a register can reshape environmental studies to be able to have a language at least to talk about climate and how we're going to come together as pluralistic communities. So just to talk about the case of Islam quickly, because there were a couple questions about this, I wrote a book about it. A lot of times in the field of Islam and environment, the goal is to extract teachings or practices that can be leveraged or operationalized for certain goals. And it's not just Muslims who do this, like NGOs are famous for doing this. I could name names. For example, to say that Hajj can be green, can be a symbol of sustainable action, right? Or to think about the water cycle in terms of wudu, and to use even the idea that people want clean water for wudu is to get buy-in for conservation projects. That's a way to operationalize religion within these frameworks, and that's very strong. It's getting stronger all the time. We see here in Indonesia right now how Islamic blended finance, for example, people are talking about it here on this campus, is a very, potentially very impactful way to enhance conservation measures to things like waqf and and that kind of thing. There's also real community engagement that comes out of religious communities. But what I'm going to talk about even beyond that is how having a framework for values and pluralism and difference can even recenter and shift around environmental studies, climate, and sustainability and how we imagine curricula. And I really want to encourage my students here, thank you for coming, and whoever else is in the room today, whether you spoke up yet or not, to really be confident in your leadership about that. Don't wait for the experts. Good grief, don't wait for America anymore. Because it's within these communities and within these measures, starting small, like Udekan said, or not so small, in terms of really getting sustainability as something that is not just a theory but a practice on this campus, for example, in terms of waste in the dorms and moving on from there, that I really think are big opportunities here. So I think that, some people say the whole idea of crisis is a colonial idea. Some people like Black feminist authors, indigenous writers, and others in the area of environment point out that for a lot of communities, the crisis happened a long time ago. We're already ended. I don't need to make to explain that, here in the global south. At the same time, coming out of an original crisis idea, whenever it happened, is an idea of ethics. And I think that there is a big opportunity here in an institution like this and in communities like these to use that as an interdisciplinary basis for the future of environmental studies, sustainability, and climate. And we're doing it right now. It's an historic program at IIIU. I've been proud to be a part of it this year, and it's been an honor and a privilege to speak to you today. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you for one inspiring presenting and discussion from Anna. This was about the environmental cases. Makes us realize, a lot, especially us as an educator, as a teacher, We can ask our students to care about our environment as a place where we live and what our gives to us. So, from Anna, I just realized about my field in Pontianak. That's about the environmental. So we have the case that is kabut asap. Kabut asap every year. That's about the people that wanna build oil palms and then house they burn the land and then that's coming kabut asap and until that maybe a week that makes a student cannot go to school and that so makes forest so yeah and then someone told me that would we in my field there is just by hectares land just by one Fortuner car so someone buy a land that the hectares of hectares just with the one Fortuner cars just for build the and then after that, the impact is burung ruai, orangutan, and enggang. That's just gone. And we, as a Pontianak and Kalimantan, just thinking about the ruai and burung enggang just as a symbolic. We never see that animals again. Let's continue with the question and answer. Is there any question? And please raise your hands. Okay, Kansa?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you to Prof. Anna Gate for the really insightful presentation about the sustainability and the environment. Actually, I really still has to familiarizing myself. I mean, like we know this in general way, but this is more like complicated actually, and happening in this era. Maybe my question is more into like we see this, we have to raise this sustainability and environment issue. Also, it's maybe the cost is also because of the modernization and globalization issue. I mean, like the build of the industry and some kind of that. It also maybe because the bigger and the massive of the development itself is also make us have to really take a great action on keeping the environment still sustained because of this globalization and itself. Maybe my question is how can we maintain the sustainability while the modernization is still like occurring in this globalized world? I mean because sometimes we can see that this is a quiet two opposite contradict action. How can we balance this together without um, um, yeah without have to make it reducing one and another? Help you can get the point. Thank you.
Okay, so another question. Maybe this will be the last question. Assalamualaikum, good afternoon. I'm Fadila Rafia from Faculty of Education. Maybe I would like to share my experience. I graduated in when I was junior high school. My school is Adinyata. So it's very concerned on environment, and then our teachers become role models, and we also practice for art, reduce, reuse, something like that. And then until I graduated, and I used to not post when I use like plastic glass, and I also was brave to like remind
when someone is smoking in front of me or beside me. Don't smoke beside me, like something like that. But when I was in what was it? Senior high school, I was in madrasah, and then it's not practice like environmental awareness. And also, when I was majoring Islamic education and meet some people from Islamic society, like in this year also, I meet what is it? Yani Ulil Awsat Abdullah, and they also support my need, something like that. So it's like dualism. There is some people who come from Muslim society support environmental awareness, some of them not. So what's your take on this? Also, some what is it? Our society still look like environmental disaster is like apocalyptic. So it's kiamah not based on scientific reason.
Think I have enough here and say your stuff.
First off, this week I to share about Kalimantan. I wrote an article once about the fires in 2015. There was an El Nino here. So, but as you know, the transboundary haze smoke from the fires, that doesn't happen all over the region. Sumatra was burning too, was burning up too. The transboundary haze smoke went all across Southeast Asia, and we can detect it overhead in Wisconsin, like the ppm from the fires here in Southeast Asia. And I'm touched by your story, and also it makes me think about an important question about agency. Like all of your questions are complicating things in some ways, and that's a powerful question in terms of it's a political question, but it's also a humanistic question too. Like what happens when a model like, oh, you just get out there and organize and be the change and the stuff that I was taught, as a kid in Berkeley. Right? What happens when you don't even know sometimes who's 75? Right? Or you can't even put it out because a peat fire burns underground. Singapore can dump all the water that they want, but it's still going to smolder and still going to catch. And that's again where I think that slowing down and taking a pause is is really in order, because there's going to be no solution to that. Right? It begins with recognizing, human experience, here's a real story. Yeah. And then also recognizing that to understand like the impact and how that environmental condition can be addressed is going to require, more than an interdisciplinary problem solving approach. It's going to involve an approach that, I think also engages the heart, right? And also engages the reality that some people don't have power in some places, or all they have is some. Related to that, it's a great question about how is this going to work when you see, I think it's the word modernization, but the word I didn't hear but I was listening for was capitalism. Like I don't have a big thing to say, and I'm not gonna like suddenly get all ideological on you, but that the global economic systems that are not putting value on environment, are leading to these kinds of outcomes. And I think that that's also an area like this where there's things we can study. We can study political ecology. We can understand about how groups have agency or don't. We can understand how global systems and economies work, through sustainability or not. And then there's also a point at which we need to have really good ways to sort out those conversations, because there's not going to be just one answer, right? And people are going to fall all along an ideological spectrum. Even more with this third, I guess it was a question, but this observation about how religious commitment, we know from the front pages of Indonesian newspapers in the last year, does not always produce the same
outcome or the same orientation among people even from the same religious group, right? If you look even within a particular ormas, I want to pick on Muhammad, I'm talking about Muhammadiyya a lot today, but there was that change, in terms of which way was it going to go, on the mining issue, and people are divided on that. For something like that, and I had the opportunity to speak, it was like a year ago now, on that issue in Foss when I first got here. I think that if I actually come back to an education kind of a response on that question, not really in terms of, oh, we need more education so people love the environment more and they do what I want, and agree with me. That's not what I mean. I mean, in order to have a conversation in the public sphere about what is Islam, what is Islamic authority, are we talking about maslaha and maqasid sharia? Are we talking about civil law, and its jurisdiction? What is this even about? Is this about sustainability? Is this about climate? Is this about morals? I think that having in place in Indonesia programs in climate and sustainability and environment would really support that, not to mention this. I think though, I gotta say, I really appreciate as an outsider and now also as an American, how robust is that conversation in the public sphere. And in my classroom, in the climate ethics classroom, I was really pleased with how students knew that they were going to have to grapple with questions around Islam and ethics and environment in order to understand the evening news. And that's something that doesn't, coming back to my religious question, that's something that doesn't happen necessarily all the time. When is environment like pushed into something that you have to think about? Even that it rained yesterday, we can kind of like push away. Okay. So I think that there's no like one answer. And I think that, that the strategic essentialism of saying like, this is how we're going to interpret religious scripture, or, this is how we're going to engage in religious communities are instrumental, but they don't give you, ultimately what's going to be an answer, which is going to come from a pluralistic community. So it's not an answer, but that's just saying like, yeah, we should start these programs. Do we have time for another question before we take on? Yeah, okay, all right, I haven't forgotten. Yeah.
Okay. We have from
Friends
the
at home. Okay, we got. Sorry, who do we have? Who do we have? 2, 3,
from Putri. From Putri Rahmi.
One of the problems in environmental education in Indonesia is that it's unable to answer or touch environmental issues at the national level. Even at, I think we have that school program. In my opinion, this is due not to integrating a political perspective in environmental education. What do I think about that? So I think the question is, should we politicize at the national level environmental education at the after we got the school program? I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't know about that school program, and I'm probably not going to have an opinion about national politics. Not because I'm scared to, but just because it's not my nation. I got enough opinions about my own country. But I think that's a great question, and I think that thinking about how to introduce the field of social science into environmental studies, particularly if it's focused on sustainability, kind of individual, private, I don't know what your program is, but a lot of times like we start small, right? Like, recycle, or, use a reusable water bottle, or walk, use your bike, this sort of thing. I think that starting at any level and introducing people to the idea that environmental issues are also big and small, and how to relate those is important, and political ecology can help to do that, and that can be taught at any level. And that's as simple as the step I said before, which I hope wasn't controversial. Yeah, groups have interests. Sometimes they compete. Sometimes the results are surprising. Not everybody has power. political action. It can be risky, you know, like these are uncontroversial things to say that I think that folks can say. I also think that a lot of times students ask me questions sort of that, you know, how do we have hope? How can I make a difference? What can I do questions? This reminds me of some of Budekan's opening remarks too. I think it's helpful, especially for young people, but for us all, to be able to think about the connections of agency, of like, what can you do in your sphere of influence? And to be realistic about that, you know, and if recycling is something that has a symbolic value as well as some material value, to talk about what the measure of that is, so that people don't think that they can't do anything about big problems, or so that they think that the little problems don't matter. Okay, that's all we got online. Anyway, thank you for whoever's out there. Thanks for joining us. Hi, Mom.
Okay, thank you for all thoughtful questions and engaging discussion. That brings us to the end of our Q&A session.
Maaf. Oh, maaf. And also, I want, if I could please, just to put pause on that for a minute. Budekan, you did have a question at the beginning.
Anyone? Okay, yeah, Basira, please. No, that's for you. I don't want to give like the end remarks or not. Okay, this is your opportunity. Thank you.
All right, okay, then we are done. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I am Basira Mujaddadi from Afghanistan, and my question is there a way to connect online learning with saving the environment?
The question was, is there a way with online learning?
Is there a way to connect online learning with saving the environment?
Yeah, how, I didn't get the verb. Is there a way to?
Is there a way to connect?
Yeah, connect online learning and invite. Yeah, sorry, my American accent. I think, all right, so I could be wrong. I bet with a question like that, that you have a better answer than I do. If you're asking that question, you've probably been thinking about how to connect online learning with environmental education. So I would like to know what you think. I can tell you what I know, which is absolutely, of course. Totally. I mean, I hope that's what is happening right now. I hope that we're all learning. I learned something today. I hope we're learning something and we're online. Yeah. And it's certainly something that in my programs we do, you know, not just in the pandemic, but yeah, I think that's a great idea. One of the just before I'd actually like to follow up with you and see what you think. But given that, like I said before, environmental science, environmental studies and sustainability tend to focus so much on practice-based work, right? There's sometimes kind of a bias or an expectation. I think it's a little bit outdated. The idea that to work in the environment, you have to put on like big boots and get muddy. You know what I mean? Or pick up the garbage. Those are all things really important in our physical environment. But to recognize that the virtual and that, you know, in a way like our remote worlds, our ecologies as well, I think is really important and could be added to understanding experiential education. So, you know, it's sort of a challenge sometimes how to think about how to do this community-based work that we expect in environmental studies when people are working remotely, you know, like across Asia or whatever, but I think that that's an opportunity. Let me just go back to, did you have more you wanted to say about that, or? Yeah.
Okay, thank you for responding to my question. Yeah, I mean, in poor country, they don't have any access to internet and network connection like this, especially in Afghanistan. I mean, if is there any way to connect online learning with saving the environment? Yeah, I got your your response. And what do you think about whole country? Is any other way without online? Is there any other way?
Yeah, okay, so the question is like how to get the resources for environmental education into areas to build capacity for that. Particularly when a lot of people want to say, oh, we can't go to the school or something like that, we'll just do it online. But what if there's not even connectivity, right, or the resources for that? That's a great question. I do not have an immediate answer, but that's what we need to be talking about here, right? And this is the right university for that. Thank you so much for that question. I'll be thinking about it all day and I know we can talk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to our speaker, Prof. Anna, and to everyone who asked questions and joined the discussion. So let's we continue to do thinking with something. Okay.
Oh, that's a cool comeback. I'm really happy.
Okay.
Great.
Wait, take a picture first. We take a picture together. Everybody stand up, please. Yeah. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, second pose. 1, 2, 3. Triple A pose. Okay, thank you so much.